Al Jazeera Podcast.
Hi, Malika Bilal here. As 2023 wraps up, we're revisiting some of the stories that defined our year. We'll be breaking down 2023 in 10 episodes. And today I am joined by one of my faves, guest host Kevin Hirten. Hey, Kevin.
Hello, Malika.
So, Kevin, back in June, you spoke with a freelance journalist named Niko Vorobyov about a short-lived mutiny in Russia from the Wagner Group. Everyone was enthralled. What do you remember about that episode?
Well, what I remember about the episode is how Niko described Prigozhin. He called him a tease. And he really was. And I recall this incident that happened. It was a Saturday, and it's one of the few times in my entire life where I just knew that I was not going to leave the couch until I saw how the story ended. And for a second there, it looked like it might have been the biggest story of the year. And it turned out to be one of the most anticlimactic stories of the year. But man, it was a thrill ride while it was going on.
After the episode, something else happened, even more groundbreaking. You recall?
Yes, what happened was the most predictable ending to this story possible. Prigozhin went right to the water's edge, and he didn't take out the king. He got almost to Moscow, almost tried to overthrow Putin, and everybody at the time said he's a dead man, and then 2 months later, he was in fact a dead man.
Wow.
In a plane crash.
Yeah, right. Really murky circumstances.
Well, yeah, and there were all sorts of conspiracy theories, and it was really fun to talk to Niko about all the different things circulating in Russian media, because so much happened with this story.
Okay, that is the tease. So here's our episode from June 27th, and a heads up, none of the dates or other references have been changed.
The Wagner Group's mercenary soldiers have been key players in Russia's war in Ukraine. After the events of the last few days, there seems to be no place for Wagner anymore in Vladimir Putin's Russia. This weekend, the mercenaries began a shocking new march, not towards Kyiv or anywhere in Ukraine, but to Moscow.
The head of the Wagner mercenary group has rallied his troops and reportedly returned to Russia.
Mercenaries declared a mutiny.
Long brewing tensions are now turning into something of an insurrection.
The advance was led by Yevgeny Prigozhin, once thought to be among President Vladimir Putin's closest allies.
The evil of the military leadership of the country must be stopped. They are neglecting the lives of soldiers. They have forgotten the word justice, and we will bring it back.
While an apparent compromise deal has been reached, for now, questions remain about how this happened, what it means for Russia's leaders, and how it could reshape the war in Ukraine. I'm Kevin Hirten, in for Malika Bilal, and this is The Take.
My name's Niko Vorobyov. I'm a freelance journalist of Russian origin. About a month after the war broke out, I decided to leave Russia, and looking at what's happening there right now, I think I made the right choice.
Niko has been reporting on the war in Ukraine for the past year and a half, but he was just as surprised when the mutiny broke out. So, Niko, the Wagner Group has been around for almost 10 years now. It's a paramilitary group that operates all over the world and traditionally sort of in the shadows by design. But that really changed in the war in Ukraine when Wagner Fighters seemed to take center stage.
Russia's private army, known for its brutality in Ukraine.
Prigozhin trying to prove to Putin his hired guns can get the job done where regular Russian units fail.
And now that's partially due to their prowess on the battlefield, but mostly because of their outspoken leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin. So in recent months, he has been absolutely relentless in his criticism of the Russian war effort, posting video after video, taking really personal shots at the defense minister. I mean, you name it. It's felt untenable for some time what caused it to spill over into open rebellion?
Sure, I mean, Prigozhin, he's been, for several months now, he's been beefing with the defense ministry. He's released videos of dead soldiers and him ranting and screaming into the camera, "Where's the ammo? Where's the ammo?"
У нас нехватка боеприпасов! 70%! Где боеприпасы?
He believes that the Russian defense minister is deliberately holding back supplies for, well, maybe not deliberately, maybe they were just like deprioritized. And he was angry about that. Then he started riding this whole sort of populist wave, like raging against the elites. So it's really kind of evolved into this sort of, I guess, kind of Donald Trump-esque raging against the elites, even though he is himself obviously a billionaire oligarch.
While tensions had been simmering, the breaking point appears to have been a deadly attack on Wagner Fighters, which Prigozhin claims was ordered by Russia's Ministry of Defense, or MOD.
Prigozhin released video of an alleged Russian airstrike on a Wagner camp in Ukraine, demanding revenge. Russia's defense ministry denied the attack.
From the defense ministry's point of view, Prigozhin was getting too big for his boots. He not only had his own private army, but he was also actively competing with their interests.
I wonder if you can just tell us a little bit about Prigozhin's biography. He's the central character of this drama, and he actually started out selling hot dogs in the streets of St. Petersburg.
Right, and before he was a hot dog man, he was a young hooligan, and he actually served time for a string of burglaries and savagely mugging a woman at knife point. And sometime after he got out, he opened the hot dog stand, and there's a couple of different accounts of how he earned his fortune after that. One story is that he used his hot dog money to open up a restaurant, which was frequented by Vladimir Putin, who was a high-ranking official in St. Petersburg at the time.
His catering company hosted events for foreign leaders as well as President Vladimir Putin's private birthday parties.
Another story is that he made a fortune through the gambling business in St. Petersburg, at which time Putin was the chairman of the committee overseeing casinos. Either way, Prigozhin's gotten closer to Putin since then, and he's earned the nickname Putin Chef for his restaurant and catering empire. And now he's a warlord as well, it seems.
Warlord and a chef. Wow. Okay. Let's try to dig into what exactly happened on Saturday for the people who weren't glued to their TV screens like I was, and I imagine you were. It starts with Wagner troops rolling into Rostov-on-Don, which is a city in the south of Russia, and ends with one of the more dramatic anti-climaxes we've ever seen. Why don't we start from what caused them to go into Rostov-on-Don?
So that was the beginning of the rebellion. Prigozhin, at first anyway, he didn't categorize it as a military coup or a coup attempt. He called it a march for justice. And he made it clear that his beef was specifically with the Ministry of Defense. It wasn't necessarily with Putin as such. So they moved into Rostov-on-Don, which is no small feat. Rostov-on-Don is a major city in Russia. I think it's the 10th biggest city in Russia.
Footage surfaced at dawn showing Wagner fighters surrounding the military headquarters in the southern Russian city of Rostov.
They occupied it with practically no resistance, and then a contingent of Wagner troops started advancing northwards past Voronezh, where there was a little fighting, and onwards towards Moscow.
Yeah, he marched in with no resistance into Rostov-on-Don. But then we started to see signs that this was getting pretty serious.
They shot down a Russian military helicopter.
A large explosion at an oil depot. Multiple helicopters as well can be seen in the area.
I talked to a girl from Voronezh who was looking out of her window, and she could actually see the columns of smoke rising from the oil depot which got blown up. At the same time, people around the city were sharing videos on Telegram, like a shell landed here or there, or a car was on fire, or there were soldiers on the street.
Yeah, I'm sure you saw those videos of citizens taking selfies with Wagner troops. it was kind of a rare glimpse of real-time public opinion in Russia. And I wonder if you read anything into that in terms of how this war in Ukraine is playing and how this incident is playing with the people.
I've talked to natives of Rostov, and the atmosphere in the city during the occupation was totally calm, actually. The crowds were even cheering them on. I don't think that's so much because of the war as such. It's more like, so everyone knows that Russia has a massive problem with corruption and thieving at the highest level, and the public can see they're being lied to. So first it was just a special operation, which implies, just like some covert ops taking place thousands of miles away. And then they started running out of men. So they had to announce mobilizations. Now the war is touching citizens' everyday lives. And Prigozhin, he raged against the system, so I think that was his populist appeal. But I don't think that necessarily reflects opinions on the war as such.
So back to Saturday, one of the more dramatic moments was when Vladimir Putin took to the airwaves and spoke directly to the Russian people. What did you make of his address?
Well, first of all, it took him a long time to actually get round to addressing the public. There are reports that he was actually flown out of Moscow, so it doesn't look good on him, that it looks like he was running and hiding. We didn't really know what's happening behind the scenes, but that's the impression a lot of people got. So his speech like calling out the mutineers as traitors or so on, didn't actually like reaffirm his strength in terms of being the leader of Russia.
He doesn't mince words. He was not acting conciliatory at all. I mean, considering the harsh language of his speech and the imagery of those troops moving almost unimpeded towards the capital, what were you thinking was going to happen?
I don't know. I'm not sure what the end game was. Could they take Moscow? I'm not sure how many troops were actually advancing to Moscow, but I've heard it was somewhere in the area of 5,000 men, which isn't enough to occupy a city of Moscow's size. But seeing as how like some of the military and the police just seem to be standing aside for them, I think it's possible they could have got to the Kremlin. But then what would they do? But it doesn't seem like anyone's actively siding with Wagner. Like, it doesn't look like army units were defecting to their side, for example. So I'm not sure, like, if they had reached Moscow, what would the end game be? Would there be like a bloody showdown? Now we won't know, probably.
But just as suddenly as the mutiny began, it ended.
Prigozhin released an audio message saying his troops would turn around and go back to field camps to avoid shedding Russian blood.
Well, Prigozhin, man, he's such a tease. Like, we were all glued to our screens, thinking, is this going to be the end of Putin? Is this going to be Russian Civil War 2? And yeah, in the end, it was just massive anticlimax. Those forces stood down.
The Kremlin says he will move to Belarus and all criminal charges against him and his soldiers will be withdrawn.
Prigozhin seems to have struck a deal with the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, and he got into a car willingly, smiling, and no one's actually... Right now, it's Monday, so this could change by the time your broadcast goes out on air. But like, as of Monday morning, no one's seen him since.
So Prigozhin retires for life as a gentleman farmer in Belarus. That's the plan? Do you buy that?
I don't think that's the end of his saga. So if there's one thing that Putin can't abide, it's traitors. And he called Prigozhin a traitor in front of the whole nation. And I'm sure Prigozhin knows this, and any agreement he made with the dictator of Belarus is no agreement at all. But the fact that he chose to go along anyway instead of saving his own behind when he was in a position to do so, I don't think that's the last we've heard of him.
So, with the head of the Wagner Group now exiled, or worse, and President Putin weakened at best, what happens to everyone else? One of the reasons why Wagner was able to get so close to Moscow, at least according to some, is that most of the Russian army is in Ukraine. What happens there now? Do you think this swings the momentum or gives at least an advantage to Ukraine's counteroffensive?
I think certainly, the weaknesses within the Russian leadership becoming more apparent. Also, we shouldn't underestimate. So even if nothing else, the Russian military lost at least 4 aircraft that day. So if nothing else happened, that's like a slight advantage to Ukraine there because aircraft are expensive. They need parts. I've read that this is one of the worst days for the Russian airborne forces in a very long time. So there's something to be said about that.
I am curious what happens to Wagner Fighters now. I mean, these are the guys who are caught in the middle. Do you think this spells the end for Wagner as we know it?
As far as I know, the ordinary mercs, they're being redeployed to Ukraine. I think some of them are signing contracts with the MOD. I think they'll probably be closer integrated into the official armed forces.
This is from Putin's address on Monday night.
I thank those soldiers and commanders of the Wagner Group who made the only right decision. They did not turn to fratricidal bloodshed. They stopped at the last line. Today, you have the opportunity to continue serving Russia by entering into a contract with the Ministry of Defense or other law enforcement agencies, or to return to your family and friends. Whoever wants to can go to Belarus. The promise I made will be fulfilled.
They need them on the battlefield, and they can't risk alienating them again either. So, I think they'll probably just become part of the regular army, either formally or informally.
Wow. So I guess that does spell the end of Wagner as we know it, at least. So the way that those Wagner columns were speeding almost unimpeded towards the capital, it does strike me that that's exactly what Putin said would happen in Ukraine. And that was a year and a half ago. And instead, tens of thousands of Russian soldiers are dead. His leadership is now being openly challenged. Do you think we'll look back and see this as the beginning of the end of the war in Ukraine?
I think this is the beginning of the end for Putin individually, but it's hard to tell what's happening behind closed doors. So there's no indication that Putin's gonna stop the war by himself. He's too invested in it. But we don't know which, if any, factions in the elite are disgruntled enough with Putin's handling of the war and, the general situation in Russia to try and get rid of him somehow. We know for sure that the more business-minded oligarchs, they're losing out big time. But will they get the siloviki, so the security officials, the generals, and the spy chiefs on board? Putin might try to purge them, but this whole affair has shown that he doesn't really know who he can trust. So I think his days are numbered, but what comes after him, I don't know. It might be someone even more hawkish, someone who wants to put the whole society on a war footing.
That's exactly where I was going, because watching this play out Saturday, Putin's issues are well documented, but for a moment there, it really seemed like he might be replaced by Prigozhin, who leads a mercenary group accused of countless atrocities in Africa and the Middle East. I don't know. I wonder if from the West perspective, what happened isn't really the best case scenario, whereas Wagner is neutralized and kind of over, at least in its previous form, and Putin is weakened.
Obviously the paramilitary warlord with possible organized crime ties isn't exactly a pacifist, but in recent interviews he's also hinted that the invasion of Ukraine was launched on false pretenses. That could just be part of his power play, though. I've also heard that there is a kind of a grudging respect between him and Ukrainian officers. So there was some hope among Russian oppositionists that Prigozhin in the presidential palace might be a better outcome. But me personally, I don't know. Now everyone knows that everything is not, as Putin kept putting it last year, going according to plan. And in fact, a relatively small band of armed men can march almost all the way to Moscow encountering minimal resistance. Prigozhin wasn't the only one in Russia with his own private army either. So look at someone like Ramzan Kadyrov, the leader of Chechnya, for example. He's gonna be the first one to paint himself as some kind of decolonial freedom fighter the minute the screws turn loose. So I think we can expect more chaos later on.
That's a great point, because I don't think people realize how fractured Russia is and how removed Moscow is to the rest of this enormous country. I mean, the country is so big. There's an analogy I always think of, is that from Moscow to the Pacific Ocean is the same distance from Moscow to Chicago. That's how big this country is. And it's held together with this idea of absolute power. And nobody was better at projecting that power than Putin.
I don't think we should go too overboard. There's a lot of talk fantasizing about the breakup of Russia. Like, I don't think we should place too much stock in that. Having said that, there isn't really like a system built outside Putin. For the past 20 years, Putin's been building power around himself. So once he goes, yeah, like as you said, that's the concentration of power around the whole country across 11 time zones is around Putin. So once he goes, you know, the whole thing could collapse, and I don't really know what that's going to look like. It could be messy.
And that's The Take. This episode was produced by Miranda Lin with David Enders, Khalid Sultan, Amy Walters, Chloe K. Lee, Sonia Bagat, Ashish Malhotra, Nagin Oliai, and me, Kevin Hirten, in for Malika Bilal. Our sound designer is Alex Roldan, Alexandra Locke is The Take's executive producer, and Nay Alvarez is Al Jazeera's head of audio. We'll be back.